stepped into my grave, laughing at the guilt and shame. All my fear was stripped away. Now I stand and sing. I am washed by the blood of the Lamb. I am washed by the blood of the Lamb. By your scars, sin erased, I'm innocent. I am washed by the blood of the Lamb. I am washed by the blood of the Lamb. By your stripes, closer than I've ever been. Glory to the Lord on high. There is no one like you. Hear my song of praise will rise to my champion, my rescue. Glory to the Lord on high. There is no one like you. Hear my song of praise will rise to my champion, my rescue. Glory to the Lord on high. There is no one like you. Oh, hear my song of praise will rise to my champion, my rescue. I am washed by the blood of the Lamb. I am washed by the blood of the Lamb. By your scars, sin erased, I'm innocent. I am washed by the blood of the Lamb. I am washed by the blood of the Lamb. By your stripes, closer than I've ever been. I am washed by the blood of the Lamb. I am washed by the blood of the Lamb. By your stripes, closer than I've ever been.
I've been lost and found, been close and far away, but my confidence is this: your love won't stop its chase. And all my life I will lift up your praises till the end of the ages. I will sing of your love. Your love won't stop. Oh, it runs like a river. You have so freely given every piece of your heart.
In my love and loss, I will not forget where my help comes from. Time and time again,
the sky falls in, when I'm feeling close to giving in. Praise the one when the fear takes hold, when I'm falling short and I lose control.
Oh, praise the one with the deepest love, who embraced his death to be close to us. Oh, praise the one with the widest heart, till the end of time you are all I want. Oh, my life I will lift up in praises till the end of the ages. I will sing of your love won't stop. Oh, it runs like a river, you have so freely given every piece of your heart. Oh, his name is Jesus, mighty Redeemer, my hope and my strength. Oh, I will never forget him, from beginning to ending. He is all that I want. Oh, his name is Jesus, mighty Redeemer, my hope and my strength. Oh, I will never forget him, from beginning to ending. He is all that I want. God, you're all that we want. For the sacrifice you made, for what you did for us, we just thank you for that. And Lord, we're going to praise you for all our days, for all our lives, no matter what happens. In the good times and the bad times, we're going to continue to sing your praises. Lord, bless this morning Robert as he preaches. In the name of Jesus, amen.
You take your Bibles and turn to the book of Exodus, Exodus chapter 19. We'll be in Exodus 19 this morning. Be our 11th message on the life of Moses and how God used him. And as you may, hopefully you noticed, we just went from 17 to 19. We skipped chapter 18 today. And last night I said that we would get back to it. At some point, I'd filter in what's in chapter 19 at a later date, and then I filtered it back in last night. I didn't know I was going to filter it in last night. So you'll hear that more about chapter 18 in a few minutes. But chapter 18 was about Jethro and Zipporah, Moses' wife, and his two sons. Earlier in the book of Exodus, they had gone back to live with their father, Moses' father-in-law. And what happens in chapter 18 is that they come back to be with Moses. And what really happens is Jethro comes in and he gets to observing what's going on in the life of Moses. And he realizes that Moses has a major weakness, and he tells Moses about what it is. And the thing is that it is a weakness that you see in most churches even today. So it's important that we look at it, and I knew we would look at it at some point, but quicker than I thought we would. But what we're going to be looking at today, though, is an entirely different subject, but it's also an area in which we have a weakness in also. And what is going to happen is the people are going to meet with God. We forget sometimes, and because we read the Bible, and it's all there in a real concise form, and it's in one little book right here that we're reading about. But we forget that the Israelites have been captive in the land of Egypt for 430 years, so 400 plus years. So Egypt is in them. The culture is in them. They think like Egyptians think. They don't have a good concept of God being a monotheistic God. In other words, only one God, because they've been in the Egyptian system. They had a God for everything. And so what happens is, after God gets them out of Egypt, you got to keep in mind, they didn't just change overnight. They didn't all of a sudden just forget who they'd been for the last 400 years and change their life. And so what takes place is that God has got to get them before they could meet with God, even before Moses could climb the mountain to get the Ten Commandments, Israel had to be ready to meet God. These people had to be ready. In Ecclesiastes chapter 12 and verse 13 and 14, it says this, the conclusion, when all has been heard, is fear God and keep his commandments, because this applies to every person. For God will bring every act to judgment, everything which is hidden, whether it is good or whether or not it's evil. So we got the writer of the book of Ecclesiastes saying, after he's looked at life, all of his life, and he looks back and he says, well, the end result is this, is that we need to learn to fear God and to keep his commandments. If you do that, you're living a pretty good life. And so God needed to get the Hebrew people back in line with his way of thinking. I like the definition that the Westminster Shorter Catechism gives. If you don't know what that is, that's the catechism that the Presbyterian Church has used forever, since 900 AD, I think. But anyway, they do it on a question and answer. They use the Socratic method of learning. And so they ask a question and then they respond with an answer. So in this Shorter Catechism, the question is this: what's the chief end of man? And this is a good one. I mean, I'm using this to reinforce this thought in ourselves. What is the chief end of man? If I were to ask you, what's the chief end of man? What could you tell me? You know, what's your purpose? Why are you here? And well, the answer they give is this: man's chief end is to glorify God. It's that simple. We're to glorify God in everything we do. And then it goes on and says, and to enjoy him forever. So man's chief aim, man's chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever. And so God wanted to get the Israelites to the point where they would glorify God in their life, but also have a relationship with him forever. You know, various preachers and authors have tried to title this chapter 19 in Exodus, with what they think best describes what takes place in Exodus 19. And they've come up with titles such as, one guy says that he called it Sinai, where Moses met God. Another one calls it the Sinai Summit. In other words, there's a big meeting there. One called it at the foot of Sinai. Another one called it the people prepared. One called it the call to covenant life. In other words, a relationship that you have with God. I simply call chapter 19 Sinai, because I think that the mountain speaks for itself. In the book, God's Wilderness, I think it says it best. It said this: these Israeli scholars who explored the Sinai Peninsula in the brief period of Israeli occupation came to experience a holiness pervading Sinai's mountains. In other words, these explorers that were there from Israel to look at this region, to look at these mountains, finally realized there's something special about these mountains. They felt God there. They just knew that something major happened there. So we've got 2 million plus people, 2 million strong. And the Israelites are camped on the plain of this holy ground. And what they were doing is they were waiting to hear from God. And and when we look at that, so we may ask the question, so what could this say to us? It says a whole lot, as you'll learn. It teaches us a whole lot about our relationship with God. So why did God call at this time for them to slow down and spend time with them? One of the reasons is God wanted to communicate to his people something about him, something about his character. He wanted these people to know who he was and how he thought and what he expected of them. In Exodus 19, verses 1 through 3, it says, in the 3rd month, after the sons of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, on that very day they came into the wilderness of Sinai. And when they set out from Rephidim, they came to the wilderness of Sinai, and they camped in the wilderness. And there Israel camped in front of the mountain. There's a flat, level plain in front of the mountain there at Sinai. The plain is some half mile to a mile wide. It's 2 miles long, just flat. And what's unusual about this particular area is that Sinai, the mountain everybody thinks is Mount Sinai, is unusual in itself, where most mountains kind of slope up. Sinai just goes up. And so they're out here in the desert on this flat plain with a few mountains down each side of it. At the end of it, you got a 7,500-foot tall mountain that just comes up out of the ground. No trees, vegetation, very little growing on it, just a rock sticking out of the ground. And so they're camped out in front of this, and it says they came to the wilderness and camped in the wilderness, and they camped in front of the mountain, and Moses went up to God. Moses goes up to God, and the Lord called him to him from the mountain, saying, "Thus you shall say this to the house of Israel, and tell the sons of Jacob." So God's revelation, we're going to see, is based upon several things. And the first one is this. God's revelation begins with a review. And this is what we're going to say. This is going to start us off in our own lives too. In verse 4, it says, "You yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians." And so God has gone back. He's going back with the people. He's reminding them what he has done in their life in the past. He's reminding them of what took place with the 10 plagues and how he got them out of Egypt. He's reminding them of what took place at the Red Sea when he got them across the sea, and then when the Egyptian armies came in trying to catch them, the seas enclosed on the armies and drowned all of Pharaoh's people. So he is reminding them of these things, and he tells them and notice what he says, I'm reminding you also of how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, in the Old Testament, an eagle is a kind of a theme, a symbol of God's deity. In Deuteronomy 32, verse 11, it says, "Like an eagle that stirs up his nest, that hovers over its young, he spread his wings and caught them." Now, this is unusual right here. Because if you ever read and you try to research this, what you'll discover is that bird people, I don't know what you call bird people that study birds, bird people have never seen eagles catch baby eagles on their wings or protect them in flight under the wings. But there's many instances where people who are just out there watching eagles have seen eagles actually shove babies out of the nest and then fly under them, and when they get to where they can't fly anymore, let them land on their back and they take them back to their nest. Lots of people have recorded that. And here we see in Deuteronomy where God says, what? That I do that very thing, not only with eagles, I do it with you. I've taken care of you. So he's reminding them and us. Keep that in mind. It's not just to them. He's reminding them and us that God takes care of us. He walks with us through the way. He catches us on his wings. So his revelation begins with this review. And what I like about this so much is this is one of those places where you just have to remind yourself, when things aren't going the way you think they ought to be going, life isn't going the way you think it ought to be going, your job's not going, your marriage is not going, your kids are not going, nothing's going right, you just have to try to slow down and remember what God has done in your past, how he's seen you through it before, and how he's going to see you through these tough times again. So the second thing is God's revelation depends upon a response from us, from them and us. Verse 5. He said, "Now then, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be my own possession among all peoples, for all the earth is mine." This is one of those if-then verses I refer to. If you do this, if you obey my voice, then you will be my possession. In other words, God's revelation to us, even today, it's always been a if-then relationship. If we do what God tells us, then God can do this in our life. You know, sometimes it's kind of confusing because we read this word covenant. We don't use that term anymore. Covenant's not part of our life. A covenant means to bind two parties together. A modern term would be a contract. In fact, if we go even further back with covenant, it also means a testament. So we got an Old Testament and New Testament in our Bible. So it's an Old Testament, it's an old covenant, it's an old contract that's there. And the Bible is divided into two contracts, the old contract and the new one. In the old, we got several covenants or contracts. This isn't all of them. There's one with Noah. God covenanted with the people to never do that again that he did and flood the earth. He covenanted to never destroy creation again. You got the Abrahamic covenant. God promised to bless Abraham and all his descendants. That's in Genesis. You got the Mosaic covenant. That's right here. We're going to be looking at it over the next few services that we have. When God meets with Moses on Mount Sinai, and he creates a covenant, the Ten Commandments, with Abraham. Then you got the Davidic covenant, where God promises descendants from the throne of David to be in the lineage of David, to be the coming Messiah. And then in the New Testament, we got the one covenant in particular, the death of Jesus for new life. You know what's so amazing? And I didn't talk about this last night, but I just thought about it. In the book of Hebrews, it talks about this new covenant. And God makes a statement in this new covenant, and this is an important statement that he makes to us. And what he said is this. He said, I'm going to write my laws upon your hearts. And then this is the new covenant. He says, no longer will you need tablets of stone. In other words, those of us under the new covenant, doesn't mean it deletes or does away or makes them obsolete, the Ten Commandments. But what it does say is this. We don't have to have them written on tablets of stone, he says, because I'm going to write them on your heart. You don't have to have somebody tell you not to steal. You know better. You don't have to have somebody tell you not to kill somebody. You know better. You don't have to have somebody tell you not to commit adultery because you know better. He says, I've written these on your heart. That's the new covenant. That's the new life that we have. So revelation depends upon the response of God's people. Their and our obedience in keeping his covenant. And God will reveal himself. Third, revelation of God results in a reward. The first reward is possession. There in verse 5 again says, you shall be my own possession. Theologically, what it means is this. Israel would belong to God. God doesn't belong to Israel. God's making a distinction here. And what he's telling us, along with them, is God don't belong to us. He's not an American God. He's not an Israeli God. He's not an Egyptian God. He's not a South American God. We belong to God. He don't belong to us. And we follow him. Our error thinking is that God belongs to us. And that's a fine line we cross when we forget that God is creator and we are the created. God was reminding them and us, I'm in control and I am in charge. Then also, there's a reward of being a kingdom of priests. In Exodus 19:6, it says, you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you will speak to the sons of Israel. What's unique about this is in 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 9, God tells us this in the New Testament. He says, you are a chosen race. You are a royal priesthood. Us. He's talking about us as the church. A holy nation. Notice he said, you'll be a priest and a holy nation. So in the New Testament, we got Peter taking the same words out of the book of Exodus and applying in the new covenant that we're going to be a royal priesthood. We're going to be a holy nation. People, notice what Peter says. A people for God's own possession. I mean, it's almost word for word what God has said. So that you may proclaim the excellencies of him, I said that, excellencies of him who's called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. You see, a priest stands between the people and God. A priest speaks on my and your behalf to God. We don't speak on the behalf of others, but we do intercede for them. That's a priestly role that God has given us. Now, let's go back for just a moment to that chapter 18 and just kind of talk about it. Not get into major details, but just talk about it for a minute. We got Jethro. He goes back and he meets up with Moses, his son-in-law. He's brought Jethro, Moses' wife, Zipporah, and his two boys, and they're all back with Moses again. And so what happens is Jethro gets to observing Moses, and he goes out with him one morning. And so Moses goes out early in the morning, and while he's out early in the morning, the people come to Moses. Everybody that's having a problem, everybody that's got a question, no matter what the issue is that comes up, they all come to Moses. Now, we got 2 million people. Now, can you imagine the issues that would come up? That'd be like me just setting up shop right here and telling y'all, hey, whatever comes up in your life this week, you can come up here and talk to me about it and we'll solve it. That's not going to happen. I'm letting you know that before time. That's not going to happen because I don't know if I could keep up with what you have. He's keeping up with 2 million people, and Jethro looks at him and said, Moses, this is not good. It's not good for you. It's not good for the people. And Moses don't ask him. Jethro just tells him. He said, what you need to do is divide your leadership up out of these 2 million. Find your best people. Put some of them over 1,000 and some of them over 500 people, some of them over 100 people, some over 10 people. And let them work with them and make the decisions. And the ones that they can't solve the problem, let them come to see you. And Moses says, that sounds like a good idea. And I bet he did think, that's a good idea. And so what he did was do it. And I think this is pertinent and important to us because I think the church is, I've mentioned this several times over the last few weeks, the church is missing out right here in that the fact is, and I know why it happens. And I'll jump back to where I was just at. One of the reasons I don't ask people to do anything because I think back, and what I think is, golly, they work full time. I'm not going to ask them to come up here and do that. They don't have time to do it. They got kids at home. They got other things going in their life, so I'll just do it myself. You know what ends up happening? I get mad at you because you don't help me. And I never asked you. I mean, really, that's the way it works. I never asked you. And my thinking is, I can remember there was a time that I wasn't a pastor in a church. I was just a member of a church. When I first got saved, and I loved it. I loved every bit of it. But I loved being there and doing something and helping Dr. Taylor minister in the church. I just loved it. Nobody paid me nothing. Nobody said thank you. I just liked doing it. Just simply because the opportunity was there. And I don't think that I've opened up the opportunities enough for you to help be the priest that you are in this church in which we're part of. Because this is our church, not mine. I've said this 1,000 times. Not my church. It's our church. And so what ends up with it is, it won't be my fault. It'll be all of ours fault. Or it'll be all ours glory, and it'll be God's glory because God's used them. And so I've started the process. I've got some people picked out that I've already contacted, and we're going to sit down and we're going to talk about some of these things and see how it is we can split up some of these roles in the church in order to be the church we should be to reach people and change people's lives. So the reward is there of being a kingdom priest. And thirdly, third reward, they're a nation set apart. Verse 6, you shall be a kingdom of priests and a holy, set apart, distinct, different, a holy nation. Holiness not only suggests, holiness demands responsibility. Because if we claim to be holy, then we're responsible for what God's given us. There's a second reason for Mount Sinai's meeting. Simply put, God had some stuff to say. He wanted to tell these people some stuff, and he wants us to hear the same thing. 4 actions. So one author called them 4 prerequisites God made before they could meet with him. He wanted to get some stuff clear with him. He said, when I get this clear, then you can meet with me, and not till then. So the first one is this, a willingness to obey. He wanted to make sure that they were willing to do what he asked. Now, based on an old classic movie, some of you are not old enough to have seen it, but there was a movie about in fact, it was called The 10 Commandments. In it, Charlton Heston starred. And so when I read Moses, I picture Charlton Heston, which is a stupid picture because Charlton Heston looks as far like a Hebrew as anybody possibly could, but I still picture Charlton Heston. And what we do is we go by the movie. You ever notice this? When we find out, in fact, it's rare. I saw something on a movie, a Christian movie, I don't remember which one it was, and I thought, that's not true. And I went back and read the Bible, and it actually was in there, and I'd never seen it. And that was a rarity, but we always assumed that Moses, or Charlton Heston, that Moses made 2 trips up the mountain. That's it. He goes up there, he goes up and gets the 10 Commandments, and he comes back down. Actually, Moses made 7 trips up and down this mountain. 7 times he climbs it. 7,400 and something foot tall, almost straight up. 8-hour trip up and down. Well, from what I read, it's not a hard climb, but it's a long climb. And so you're going 7,000, well, most of you have seen Pinnacle Mountain. That's about 1,000 foot, so 7 times as high as it, going up and down this mountain. And then, so he's pretty busy, but listen to the end result of his first trip. Look down at verses 7 and 8 of chapter 19. Moses came, he called the elders of the people, and he set them before them all these words which the Lord had commanded him. And all the people answered together, all that the Lord has spoken, we'll do. 2 million people, 2 million voices strong, mountains down 2 sides of them and 1 at the end on a flat desert plain. Can you imagine the sound of 2 million people answering God on that plain? And Moses brought back the words of the people to the Lord. I don't imagine he had to tell him. I imagine he heard them. So the first thing that we need to do in order to hear from God is to be willing to obey. Not just them, but us. Maybe you're not hearing from God. Maybe you're not obedient to God. Maybe that's the issue. Or maybe you've been obedient and you quit being obedient, so God quit speaking to you because you won't do what he asked you to do anyway. Or you can't hear him because you're not obedient. Second thing, an openness to listen. Verse 9, the Lord said to Moses, behold, I will come to you in a thick cloud so that people may hear when I speak with you and may also believe in you forever. And so Moses told the words of the people to the Lord. All right, so we got a ready to hear, and then we got a ready to obey. James 1:19, this you know, in the New Testament, we got a New Testament backup on this. This you know, my beloved brethren. Everyone must what? Be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. Totally opposite of what God asked of us. So we need to listen, we need to obey, we need to hear what he says. And then the third one is we need to pay attention. Look in verses 10 and 11. The Lord said to Moses, go to the people and consecrate them, and tomorrow, and let them wash their garments, and let them be ready for the 3rd day, for on the 3rd day the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in sight of all the people. There's some questions. I've said there's places in the Bible I don't fully understand. I'd fully admit that weakness that I have. And there's some that we'll never understand till we die and go to heaven and be able to ask some questions. But why the 3rd day? I don't know. Why did they have to wash their clothes? It doesn't tell us. Why Moses went up down the mountain 5 times before he ever received the 10 Commandments? We don't know, other than God's still teaching them. Are the 3 days a foreshadowing of Jesus in the grave? Because it was 3 days after his death before he revealed himself. I don't know. It could be. We don't know that. Did they wash their garments as a symbolic gesture of pure hearts like is in the rest of the Bible, like lifting up of hands? 1 Timothy 2:8. Therefore I want the men in every place to pray, what? Lifting up holy hands. Is that what it means to consecrate yourself and to put on clean garments? I know I feel better when I put on clean stuff, and so maybe he's trying to get them to think that way, but we don't know. Why the 5 trips up and down the mountain? We don't know. But the point is this. I think this is it right here. God gives instructions we may not understand. But it's about obedience. Are we going to do what he says anyway? That's what he's asking them. And the fourth prerequisite is a recognition of his holiness. Verse 12, it says, you shall set bounds for the people all around, saying, beware that you do not go up on the mountain or touch the border of it. Whoever touches a mountain shall surely be put to death. Man, that's serious. I mean, really. It's starting to get real serious at this point. And to me, this is probably the highlight of all the story of Moses and in Exodus is right here. Because this is our weakness in the church today. Right here is where we're going to find it. This is where it all is. Because I've mentioned this before in previous sermons, and I fear this one teaching at Sinai is the worst failure that we have. So here we have the separation between the Creator and the created, and it becomes real. Look in verses 13 through 18. No hand shall touch him, but he'll surely be stoned or shot through, whether man or beast, he shall not live. So no man will touch God. And when the ram's horn sounds a long blast, they'll come up the mountain. So Moses went down from the mountain to the people and consecrated the people, and they washed their garments, and he said to the people, be ready for the third day. Then he says, don't even go near a woman. So it came about on the third day, when it was morning, that there was thunder and lightning and flashes and a thick cloud upon the mountain and a very loud trumpet, so that all the people who were in the camp trembled. And I bet they did. And Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet God. Let's go back for just a minute. God is wanting them to see who he is. And so he's reminding them of the power that he has and what he can do. And so they brought the people out of the camp to meet God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. They all gathered around the mountain. Now, Mount Sinai was in smoke because the Lord descended upon it in fire. They have now found a mountain in the Sinai Peninsula now. It's under the control of Egypt, I think it is right now, or maybe Turkey. But the top third of this mountain is almost totally black. And they're saying it's because of the heat and the fire and smoke when God descended on this mountain. It's still there today, still evidence today. And as smoke ascended, it tells us in verse 18, like the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mountain quaked violently. Now, consider this. Later in Israelite life, the Ark of the Covenant represented God's presence. In it, Hebrews 9:4 tells us exactly what was in the Ark of Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant is that thing that Indiana Jones was chasing after in his first movie. I thought it was an excellent depiction of it. I mean, it wasn't biblical, but it was just fun watching it. But in Hebrews 9:4, it tells us what's in this ark. Having a golden altar of incense, and the Ark of the Covenant covered on all sides with gold, in which was a golden jar holding manna. So there was a example of manna in the ark, and Aaron's rod which budded, and the tables of the covenant, are the 10 Commandments. Now, only the Levites, the tribe of Levi was the priestly tribe. That's who Aaron was from, Moses' brother. Only the Levites were allowed to carry the Ark of the Covenant. And then it was only under certain guidelines. I'm not going to get into all of them. I can't remember them all. But the Ark of the Covenant was on rods, and it had rings on the ends, and they could slide poles through those rings as long as they didn't touch the ark, because even if a Levite touched the ark while they're carrying it, they fell over dead right there on the spot. Killed them immediately. Just fell over dead. And you're wondering, like I wonder, why? Simply because God said don't touch it. Because if you do, you're going to die. It was that simple. So they couldn't touch it. So then the ark was placed or kept in the Holy of Holies, in the tabernacle, the movable temple that they had in the wilderness, in Exodus, a tent, or in the permanent temple that was built in Jerusalem. So the ark was placed in the Holy of Holies, in the tabernacle, or in the temple. Only the high priest could enter into the Holy of Holies, and then only once a year on the Day of Atonement. And this was a major thing. To enter, now listen to what I'm saying here, to enter, God talked about clean hearts. To enter with an unclean heart, the high priest, meant certain death as soon as he walked in the room with the Ark of the Covenant. It was so serious that what would take place is that 24 hours before the Day of Atonement, the high priest would get another priest to sit with him, to keep him awake. In order that he wouldn't even dream a dream that might have something bad in it. Because he was so afraid to walk in there with the Ark of the Covenant in the Holy of Holies in fear that he was going to die. It was so serious that these high priests would sew bells on the bottom of their robes so that the people on the other side of the veil that kept the Ark of the Covenant separated in the Holy of Holies could hear him walking around. And if they stopped ringing, they knew that God had killed him. But they had also tied a rope around the boy's waist so that he could, around his foot, so if they did quit hearing the bells, they could pull him out because they weren't going in there to get him. That wasn't going to happen. So then, though, think of this. Jesus at his crucifixion. Think of what it tells us in verse Matthew 27, 50 and 51. Jesus cried out again with a loud voice. He yielded up his spirit, and behold, the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth shook, and the rocks were split. Now, the veil of the temple, that was where the Holy Holies and the Ark of the Covenant, they were behind the veil in the temple. And what this was telling us, notice what it says, this veil of the temple, in fact, this big veil that was hanging there was 6 inches thick. I don't know how you get cloth like that, but it's 6 inches thick. And it tells us it was split from the top to the bottom. In other words, man didn't tear this veil. God split this veil when Jesus died on that cross. And what it signified is that no longer do you need a mediator between man and God. You now have access into God. Jesus is that go-between. But the thing to remember, and like Dr. Irby always used to tell us when I was in college, you may have open access to God, but you better walk in there in fear and trembling. You don't just wander into the presence of God. It's a serious thing when you meet with God. And that's part of our problem in the church. The idea of God is that man upstairs or Daddy or Bubba and all these other things that we call him, the good old guy. You better watch it when you're saying those kind of things. And I love the song, I Can Only Imagine, but let me tell you, there's one spot in there that tells the truth in it. When I see him, will I get on my knees and fall? That's what will take place. Nothing else is going to take place. You're not going to be dancing and jumping and high-fiving with Jesus. You're going to realize and recognize who it is. What it tells us in Philippians is, work out your salvation in fear and trembling, in Philippians 2. In Hebrews 10:31, it says it's a terrible thing, terrifying thing to fall in the hands of the living God. It is. It is. And then what's this? I love this. In John 18, verses 4 through 6, Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane. And they're looking for him. Judas has told them where he is. And so a Roman cohort goes to find him. A Roman legion is 500 men. So we got 500 Roman soldiers, not just people, Roman soldiers, going to arrest Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. These guys aren't afraid of anybody. And so 500 guys are out there. And Jesus, knowing all these things, it tells us in John 18:4, knowing all these things were coming upon him, went forth and said to them, who is it that you seek? And they answered, Jesus of Nazareth. And then look what Scripture tells us. All he says is, I am he. And Judas was also there. The one who betrayed him was standing with him. And when he said that, I am he, notice what happened. They drew back and fell to the ground. It's a terrifying thing to enter the presence of the living Lord. And you don't respond in the way you think you will. 500 soldiers fell to the ground in front of him. In Exodus 19, verse 20, it says, the Lord came down on Mount Sinai to the top of the mountain. The Lord called Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. Significant that when the time came and the people were ready, notice what took place. God came down to meet them. They didn't come up to meet him. God went to see them. In verse 21, the Lord spoke to Moses, go down, warn the people, so that they do not break through to the Lord to gaze, and many of them will perish. And then if you read all of verses 22 through 25, it tells us this, set bounds about the mountain and consecrate it. So we got the Lord coming down on Sinai. You know, it's significant that when the time came, that God came to meet with them. There are moments, God moments, when we know that we've entered into the presence of God. In fact, I'm going to ask the musicians if they'll come back up, and we're going to close in a minute with a song. And the song is, yes, for those of you who may not know Jesus as Lord, I always want to give you an opportunity to come and pray and let someone tell you how you can do that and make him Lord of your life. But also it's for us to consecrate ourselves to the power and the presence of the Lord. I think that's what the church needs more than anything right now. Because there are moments, there's God moments, when we know that we've entered the presence of God. When God just shows up, he visits with us. And it's kind of startling when it happens. There are times when he visits his church. He just shows up. And so the question I have is, why one time and not another? What makes the difference? And we're going to look at the answer for that in just a moment. But I'm going to tell you, I listened to my wife the other night talking to her sister. And I thought Sylvia knew all these things, but she got to telling her about some times in our life when God just showed up. And I've told them before. I may have told them here. Probably have. Maybe you forgot. I'm going to give you one in just a moment, just as a reminder of what God does when he shows up, when you're not expecting it. And why it happened then, I don't know why. But I heard her telling this story to her sister, and I thought, God, that's good. I mean, really. That was an amazing story. And I forget how amazing some of these stories are that we have. But when we were in New Orleans, I worked for a place called, it was a ministry to the ship, the seamen on ships. And what we did was we went every day and went and visited the ships. New Orleans, Port of New Orleans used to be one of the busiest ports east of the Mississippi River. It was a major port. I don't know how it is now, but it was a major port. We'd go down to the wharves every day, and we'd go on to the ships, and which was always interesting because you got to go up to the captain's quarters and all this stuff, and huge, huge ships down there. I remember one day I even tried to sneak on a Russian ship. I saw it sitting there, and there wasn't nobody at the top of the rope ladders going up the side of the ship. That was always a scary thing anyway. You're over the Mississippi River and you can see all the way down and you're a couple hundred foot in the air walking up the side of the ship. And I thought, man, I'm fixing to get on this ship until a guy with a submachine gun stopped me at the top of the ladder. He let me walk all the way up before he says back down. But anyway, we'd go visit them, and the purpose of visiting these guys was we would pick them up. We'd tell them what time of night. We're going to be back out here. We'd say, we're going to be here at 6 o'clock. We're going to stop at this ship. And those of you who want to come out to the center, we'll take you back out there. We had games. We got ping pong tables, pool tables. We'll help you make international calls. We got a grocery store. We got a store there. And then we'll have a chapel service. And so we'd do this, and we'd go get them. We'd bring them back out there. And at 10 o'clock, we'd take them back to the ships down there at the Port of New Orleans. And so one night, and one of the things, John Vandercook ran it at the time. His son runs it now. But John, his requirement was, it doesn't matter how late it was, you had a chapel service. You got the chapel service in. You preached the sermon. If you had to cut it short, whatever, you got it done. But one night, I kept waiting, and the interpreter never showed up. And I'm thinking, what do I do now? These ship guys, these sailors on these ships, these cargo ships, didn't speak English. They all speak Portuguese is the language of the seas. So they all spoke Portuguese. And I thought, what do I do now? John's going to expect me to do this, but I don't have a translator. So finally, I just decided, I guess I'll just preach a sermon to these guys like an idiot, and they can sit there and listen to me. Not going to understand a word I'm saying, but I'm going to preach a sermon. So I did that. I preached a sermon. And in that sermon, I taught them how to be saved, what you need to be saved. And then I gave an invitation. And lo and behold, 3 guys walk up. I thought, what is this about? What do they do? I didn't know what to say to them. There's nobody there who can speak English besides me. I didn't even know what to ask them. And finally, the interpreter came in about that time. I said, I need some help here. He said, what's wrong? I said, I preached a sermon. I gave an invitation, and these 3 guys came up. I said, ask them what they want. They couldn't understand me. I said, ask them what they want. So he's talking to them. I don't understand the word they're saying. And then he turns and looks at me, and these are the words that came out of his mouth. They want to accept that Jesus that you just told them about. And it dawned on me. I had an Acts 2 miracle happen. I didn't speak in tongues. They heard me speaking English in Portuguese. It's a miracle of the ears, just like in Acts 2. And God showed up for no reason. No reason. Why? I don't know. I don't know, but I've seen it happen. And I'm sure you've seen it happen in illness and family problems. God just shows up. You've seen it happen in churches. But that's what we need. You know, Israel had to get ready. They had to get ready to meet God. You need to get ready to experience God. You do. I need to get ready to experience God. I do. The church in Texarkana needs to get ready to experience God. City Church needs to get ready to experience God. So that's what I want you to pray about while we sing together and we close this service. Stand with us and let's sing.
Lost are saved, find their way at the sound of your great name. All condemned, feel no shame at the sound of your great name. Every fear has no place at the sound of your great name. The enemy, he has to leave at the sound of your great name. Let's sing Jesus worthy. Jesus, worthy is the Lamb that was slain for us. Son of God and man, you are high and lifted up. And all the world will praise your great name. All the weak find their strength at the sound of your great name. Hungry souls receive grace at the sound of your great name. The fatherless, they find their rest at the sound of your great name. The sick are healed, the dead are raised at the sound of your great name. Jesus, worthy is the Lamb that was slain for us. Son of God and man, you are high and lifted up, and all the world will praise your great name. Redeemer, my healer, Lord Almighty, defender, my Savior, you are my King. Redeemer, my healer, Lord Almighty, defender, my Savior, you are my King. Redeemer, my healer, Lord Almighty, defender, my Savior, you are my King. Jesus, worthy is the Lamb that was slain for us. Son of God and man, you are high
Praise your great name, Lord. Be blessed and go this week. You're dismissed.